It's hard to believe that Lincoln not only saw John Wilkes Booth perform in a play, but saw him at Ford's Theater, which would become the scene of Booth's final act, and Lincoln's final act, the assassination. Lincoln went to Ford's just a few days before delivering the Gettysburg Address. He was in the midst of writing it, and he loved the theater, so he had an opportunity to see John Wilkes Booth in a turgid French play that had been translated called The Marble Heart. And John Wilkes Booth played the villain. And during the play, every time he had something villainous to say, he would direct it up at the presidential box. And finally, someone who was with Lincoln said, "He almost seems to be reciting those lines to you." And Lincoln said, "He does talk very sharp at me, doesn't he? Very sharp." John Wilkes Booth always wanted to do something really grandiose. He once thought of kidnapping Lincoln in a theater and lowering him to the stage from his balcony box. He was deluded into thinking no one would interfere. So on Inauguration Day, March 4th, 1865, he positioned himself behind stanchions in the Capitol Rotunda, waited for Lincoln to come out of the Senate chamber, which in those days was the site of the swearing in of the vice president, heading out toward the portico to deliver his great second inaugural. And according to one eyewitness, he sort of lunged beyond the stanchions with what the person who stopped him said was a crazed look in his eyes. That was a moment that he might have shot Lincoln. Lincoln went on to deliver the speech from the portico. If you look at some of the photographs, you can see John Wilkes Booth up in an upper balcony, watching, wearing a top hat. So I think it's possible he may have thought of doing something even there. So murder was on his mind for quite a few weeks. Lincoln delivered a well-promoted in advance speech from a White House window on April 11th, 1865. Booth and one of his co-conspirators, there are two different versions of who was with him, Lewis Powell or David Harold, one of them was with him. And Lincoln gave a rather long and tedious speech, not his most inspiring effort. It's too bad it was his final speech, as it turned out. And in the speech, he said, "The time has come to give the elective franchise to the colored man," he said, "to the very intelligent and those who serve in the army." It sounds today like means testing or limiting the vote, but in fact, at that moment, Lincoln becomes the first president ever to propose the franchise for African Americans, men, of course. And Booth is there, and either then or right after that turns to one of the conspirators and says, "That's the last speech he'll ever make." According to one witness, he said that means Negro equality. He doesn't use the word Negro. And he made good on his word just 3 nights later. The advertisements for Our American Cousin, the special benefit performance on Good Friday, 1865, announced that Lincoln would be accompanied by General Grant. Booth believed he could kill both of them, and his plan was to dismember the Union government. Mrs. Grant did not want to spend the evening with Mary Lincoln. They had been together in separate boats at City Point, Virginia, just a few weeks before. Mary, as usual, made life difficult. She wouldn't go to see Mrs. Grant until Mrs. Grant came to see her. She wouldn't go to Mrs. Grant's lunch. She did her own rival lunch. It went back and forth. It was not a match made in heaven. So Mrs. Grant and the general invented a great alternative. They would go up to Long Branch, New Jersey, to visit their children whom they hadn't seen for a long time. And that was the excuse they gave the White House. Otherwise, Grant would have either done one of two things: become the victim of John Wilkes Booth or stop the assassination. And it's something he regretted for the rest of his life because he was in pretty good shape. He thought he could have prevented it. There are many blood relics from the assassination, including the dress worn by the actress in the play, Laura Keene, very famous actress at the time. She rushed up to the box in her gown and was said to have cradled Lincoln's head on her lap while the doctors who were in the audience and who were helping decided what to do with him. And later she emerged, after Lincoln had been taken across the street to die, she emerged with a blood-stained dress, which later went on tour with her. Wherever she went, there was an exhibition of her blood-stained dress. The truth is, Lincoln didn't bleed very much. In fact, to get technical about it, he had a compressed wound, and doctors had to stick their fingers in the wound to release his lungs so that he could breathe again. I mean, he was going to die. They knew that right away. But very little blood shed at all. However, when Booth had finished shooting Lincoln, Major Henry Rathbone, who was in the box that night, accompanying the daughter of a New York United States Senator, stood up and tried to stop Booth from escaping. Booth had a Bowie knife and slashed at his arm and opened an artery. Rathbone bled all over the place. It was spurting, and nobody was paying attention to him because the president was lying on the floor of the box. It's his blood.